Hi, this is Paul. Unbelievable. The big conversation, religion and evolution. McGrath and Weinstein just dropped today. Can't leave it alone. Gotta talk about it. Let's go. I want to begin first, though, with C.S. Lewis and his book Miracles and his definition of a naturalist and what nature is. Nature, in terms of how we use it, is a thing that goes on its own. The naturalist believes, what the naturalist believes is the ultimate fact. The thing that we can't go behind is a vast process in space and time that is going on of its own accord. That's the whole show. And this, of course, leads into one of my ideas about Group A and Group B. Group A are things that go on their own, things that go on their own accord. If you're a naturalist, everything in the universe is part of Group A. There is no Group B. We ourselves are not part of Group B. Group B doesn't exist. Group B actually has things that watch and choose and employ reason and colonize things in Group A. Now, you might say, well, human beings are clearly part of Group B. We would say that human beings are the height, at least of what we know, of Group B. But finally, Group B is an illusion. And this is essentially Sam Harris's point of view, that we don't really employ reason, in fact, or perhaps reason is simply when we get into a little bit of where Bret Weinstein goes, reason is a memified series of cause and effects. But then we would, of course, have to figure out what error is. So it's one thing leads to another, Group A and Group B. All right, now let's dive in. Now, most of my clips are going to be from Bret. And Alistair, I thought, did a good job. But one of the issues in many of these conversations is I don't know how well either of these guys knew each other's body of work. And what makes that difficult is that in a sense, they sort of talk past each other and have to talk in generalities. And I would have liked to have seen Bret Weinstein pushed much more on what I think are a lot of these dreaded compatibilisms that he continues to maintain. In C.S. Lewis's terms, he purports to be a naturalist, but he keeps coming out as very much someone who believes in Group B, just believes that human beings are the top of Group B, and there is nothing above us in Group B, and hence his pessimism about the future. Now, he begins with a really nice treatment of genes and memes, and I thought this was, the whole conversation I thought was really terrific.
Well,
I'm gonna make sure I was playing at fast speed before. It's not fast speed here. And again, yeah, and before I say anything, I've been hard sometimes on Bret, and I don't mean to be. The way I'm hard on him is a kind of kind hardness. I mean, I hold no ill will towards him. If he was a college professor, I would love to sit in his class. He seems like a really great, cool guy, but it's these thoughts and these ideas that I really want to engage with, and I think you know where I'm coming from, and I would hope you would understand that this is by no means a personal attack, that I have a great deal of respect for him, but let's work on some of these ideas. And again, I think this presentation here, you really lace things out well often.
Let's get into some of the meat of what we're talking about tonight.
Try it again.
I wonder if you could maybe give us a brief and hopefully layperson-friendly account of how you imagine religious belief arose in a strictly evolutionary sort of paradigm. Bret.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is what we don't tend to understand when we take a strict classic Darwinian perspective about humans is that human beings are the far end of a continuum.
Okay, now I really like where he's going. Maybe I'm going to let him talk, and then I'm going to back up, and we'll let him talk again, because I like what he says here, and there's a certain degree that, how well does this map on my Group A and Group B?
Most creatures have essentially one mode of inheritance, and it is genetic. We have a second mode, and it is cultural. And we are not completely alone. All of the other mammals have a cultural mode, and almost all of the birds have it, but that's a tiny fraction of the biota. But for
And I think he would have to say our capacity for culture is extraordinarily different from birds and the rest of the animal kingdom's capacity for culture. That is a significant difference between us. We might recognize some limited capacity for culture in some of the animals and birds, but our capacity for culture is, there's just really no comparison.
For those creatures that do have this second mode, what you have is a locale where information can be stored in a non-genetic form, and it can be acted upon by the very same kinds of Darwinian forces that shape genes.
That's a really important phrase, so I'm going to play it again.
But for those creatures that do have this second mode, what you have is a locale where information can be stored in a non-genetic form, and it can be acted upon by the very same kinds of Darwinian forces that shape genes.
Okay, a couple of things in here. Storage of information and information itself. I mentioned before Daniel Dennett was on Unbelievable, and when pressed on his materialism, he snuck in information as well. Now, information is a funny sort of thing. When you look at John Vervaeke's physicalism, John Vervaeke intentionally includes relationality within his physicalism. Now, that relationality can be time and space relationality. Those things within physicalism. Now, to what degree is time and space relationality dependent upon an observer? This gets us into the consciousness question. I was speaking with one person who noted that he thought that Jordan Peterson's God really has three parts. There's chaos. I hate it when people call me. I thought I could just swipe it away. So there's chaos, there's the logos, and then there's the observer. And that's really helpful to have that included in the picture. Okay? I'm distracted by the telephone call. If we're talking about information, one of the things I like here about Bret's notion is that, okay, there's a way that information is stored and information is processed within culture. And then he adds the writer in the same Darwinian way. Now, again, John Vervaeke's course and his relevance realization and his treatment, his relationship between relevance realization and Darwin's observation and the change that Darwin made in the culture is important. And this gets into my Group A and Group B. Because again, the whole point of Darwin let's see if I can jump to this. We'll see how this new system works. Okay. The whole point of Darwin is that Finchness is the variable, okay? And Darwin's point was not so much that there was process, but this process is blind. All right? Now this, I think, is a huge problem in Bret's schema right here. Now let's hear what he says again.
But for those creatures that do have this second mode, what you have is a locale where information can be stored in a non-genetic form, and it can be acted upon by the very same kinds of Darwinian forces that shape genes.
Can be acted upon by the same kind of Darwinian forces that shaped genes. Now, I would have to add that this entire realm of consciousness and choice, is this the same Darwinian forces that affect genes? Is that really what you want to say? I don't think so, because later on in your system, all of your ethical admonition completely assumes consciousness and will and choice and rationality. Are you really saying that what's happening in the meme verse is the same factor that's happening in the genetic verse? So this is where, again, you get into Group A and Group B, because Group A says this is just processes. Now, even with Vervaeke's relevance realization, John wants to keep that sort of on the mechanistic side, but the more I'm listening and pondering his relevance realization, the more I think, that's really in many ways group B. That's really in many ways the land of fudginess. Now, when I'm saying fudginess here, I don't mean it as a negative thing. I'm meaning it as mystery, and often motivated mystery on our parts. But this is, I think, already in Bret's initial formulations, there are inconsistencies and problems that undermine his perspective in this.
So, in one sense, Dawkins introduced this idea with the concept of memes. It became clear in my conversation with him in October, though, that he didn't take the concept of memes very seriously.
And Jordan Peterson makes this exact same point. And of course, Jordan and Bret know each other, and maybe they've been talking about it. And I think that's a very real and fair point.
That he thought that it was loosely analogous to the genetic Darwinian process, but it didn't have important consequences. What I would argue to you is that we humans have offloaded a large fraction of the adaptive landscape to what I would call the software layer, right? Our genomes do not create a functional creature. We are utterly helpless at birth, and our very long childhoods are a time period in which one can discover and basically self-program the software necessary for life.
Now, I've restarted the Jordan Peterson Biblical Series commentary, and I think it's at this point what Bret touches on is exactly where Jung comes in, and Jung's observation that this software universe is going on, but again, Jung's observation that the software universe is going on under the surface. And so Jordan Peterson notes that all of this stuff under the surface is really important for the things that stick up out of the ground, as it were. The things that we are seeing and the things that we are imagining we are dealing with rationally, but they're sort of like my hands. Like that my fingers, let's imagine that the fingers here are the dirt line. And we're moving around these fingers with rationality, kind of as this other hand is like group B, rearranging these fingers. And Jung is saying, well, there's a lot of stuff under the ground here. And the stuff under the ground here is really important for these fingers, because if you know anything about the hand, the muscles for the hand, they're not really up here in the fingers. They're really down below here in the rest of the hand, in this dark, dreamlike, strange space that we don't see. Okay? So yes, I think not only does Harris not sufficiently does Dawkins not sufficiently appreciate the power of meme, I think Bret doesn't sufficiently appreciate the power of meme. I think Peterson does even more.
Now, what we do during that time is we largely pick up the wisdom of our immediate ancestors who we meet, and then we augment it with things that we discover that they didn't know, which is a very small fraction of what we come to understand. So, if you take that paradigm, what you'll realize is that we get handed a belief system, that individuals whose belief system is a better match for the world have advantages. People whose belief systems are a poorer match for the world have disadvantages. And over time, those belief systems, the narratives that we hand off, will be refined by this process.
Now we're, in a sense, getting over into our friend Adam. He always opens his videos that way, and he had a conversation with Justin Brierley, and I made a video about that I made a bunch of videos this week, and I'm not necessarily putting them out in the order that I made them, partly because I want to get this video out probably on Saturday, because the other video just came out. So I'm going to put this one out, treating a little bit more Adam and Justin and their conversation. But that's essentially Adam's point. Adam keeps making this point again and again, that the degree to which your belief system, all of this software, is actually correlates to reality, well, your tribe will succeed. And then Adam goes on further to say, okay, and that's why, for example, the Germans lost the Second World War. And Justin Brierley sort of pushes back on that and says, I'm not sure we can necessarily make those correlations quite so quickly. And what's interesting about this is that there's a very interesting conversation, that there's so many interesting things out there that I really would like to treat but just don't have time for. There's a fascinating conversation that I actually got from Adam's Twitter feed on Michael Shermer and Donald Hoffman. And that was a fascinating conversation because Shermer just looked uncomfortable, whether he was thinking that Donald Hoffman was too woo. But Donald Hoffman pushes pretty hard that even in the Darwinian sense, it's the tricks and hacks that really count and not the correspondence to truth that matter in Darwinian evolutionary process. And this is a very fascinating assertion because it really sort of undermines the whole story about human rationality and its emergence from below. That somehow rationality was a thing that we possess and we developed it over time because it gave us an adaptive advantage. And in a sense, Bret is making that exact argument now with respect to religion. And I think I don't want to dismiss that idea because there is truth to it. And in fact, Christians have been making very similar claims for a very long time. You will often find Christians saying things like, well, the Bible is humanity's owner's manual. And so part of the reason that we know we can trust this is because it's validated by our experience out there in the world. And I'm not going to dismiss that argument, but we need to be careful with these arguments for exactly the same reason that Justin Brierley and I sort of hold back from Adam's argument that, well, the reason that the Germans lost the Second World War is because their moral view of the world had too much unreality in it, too much error in it, and the victors then had more. So, in other words, you then have a hierarchy. You have a value hierarchy. This is a meme from the Discord, our bridges of meming. And so you've established a value without simultaneously creating a hierarchy. So because the Soviets beat the Germans, the Soviet system is more true than the Nazi view. And because the Americans finally triumphed in the Cold War, that the American view is superior to the Russian view. Well, there are a lot of implications in there, but also, and this is a real factor when it comes to implicit progressivism within Darwinian ideas. And I think there's an implicit progressivism in here because you have the difficulty of time frame. And again, if we go back to Vervaeke's thinking about relevance realization, what you have in success is fittedness, but context and time are critical elements of that fittedness. And in that way, Darwinianism can't be progressive. And this is a point, I'm not going to play a lot of clips of Alistair McGrath, but this is a point at the very end of the conversation that McGrath tags Weinstein with, and I think it's a fatal point for Bret's position. Okay, so the conversation continues into some interesting places.
Well, I love this, and the word integrity is great because it also contains the root of integral. And part of the problem with this modern fascination with believe what you like is that people have the sense that they can dine a la carte and that they can adhere to this principle over here and this principle over there, and there's no magic by which that should work. The fact is, a religious tradition is a set that goes together. And we do have reason to believe that that set functions together, or it would not have come through to the present. Nothing guarantees that going forward from here in the 21st century that it's still relevant, may even be very dangerous. But we do know that at some point in the past, those ideas fit together. But if you want to pick one from here and one from there, the chances that you come up with a coherent set of beliefs and principles is pretty close to zero, which begins to raise questions, which is, if you're going to adhere to a kind of faith, are you not then obligated to take on all of the edicts that come along with it? And what do we do if some of those, or in some cases all of them, are now in conflict with the realities of the modern world? And what do we do about the fact that different traditions will be absolutely incompatible in a way that makes it difficult for us to get along in civilization? This is really the pickle, and I think if there's a bitter pill for all of us, it is that once we come to realize that there is wisdom in these traditions, we also have to come to realize that it is not one wisdom and it won't all fit together easily and work itself out.
And now, again, this is so typical of my reaction to a lot of Bret's points. On one point, I agree with you completely. These traditions come to us as whole cloth. But now, in a minute, in the next clip I'm going to play, he basically makes the point that, well, now we've got these books, and these books are full of all kinds of things, and these books are full of wisdom, and so we have to pick and choose. Well, yeah. And in fact, one might argue that I got into this in, let's see, when did I release that video? I haven't released it yet. Okay. So there's another video coming on with the challenges that's going to be coming out next week. But the attribution dilemma that we have here. Steven Pinker wants to attribute the Enlightenment to the Greeks and not the Christians. And it's like, whoa, you're really not going to be able to make that argument historically. But what every tradition, including the Christian one, is composed of is a long selection of things that are tested and go through time. In fact, this is what living church traditions are doing all the time. Now, part of the weakness of this a la carte posture towards traditions is, I would argue, the individualism inherent in it, in that communities do a far better job of filtering traditions than individuals, because individuals say, well, this will work for me, and this will work for me, and this will work for me, and this will work for me. Well, that's fine, but will it work for all of us? And in fact, it came up finally in the question and answer. Always in many of these conversations now, it's the LGBT question that comes up. And now, obviously, if you're same-sex attracted, well, this variant of Christianity that affirms it works for me. Well, that's fine. But the whole point of all of these traditions, as they go through time, the reason that they are wisdom, and we look at them as wisdom, is that they've been tested in a whole variety of contexts and in a variety of ways. And this is when I talk about the fittedness of Christianity. I think one of the advantages that Christianity has had over, let's say, Islam and Judaism is Christianity's seeming capacity for adaptation in multiple different contexts. Now, that capacity comes, in fact, with a liability, which means that it can be difficult to maintain your narrative thread and your coherence to the tradition, because there's so much diverse cultural application going on. But over time, that adaptive capacity, I think, is a huge asset for the religious tradition, as opposed to a number of other religions. For example, Islam, well, you're locked into the language. Judaism, you're sort of locked into the language there. Northrop Frye, in his lectures at University of Toronto, the point he makes in the first lecture is that Christianity, right from the beginning, works from a translation, which means right at the start there's a certain nimbleness with which Christianity is working through the various elements of different traditions. And in fact, a subtle reader of the New Testament will notice this in the way that the Apostle Paul, in a sense, has a double standard with respect to Paul himself observes in Jerusalem, the tradition takes a vow, cuts his hair, does all of these things because he's acting as a Jew, but in the midst of the Gentiles, he acts differently because he says God understands these two worlds. So already in the Christian tradition, there's a nuanced attempt at dealing with what we might say is dogmatism. I can't pause this as well as I could. Oh, I can't pause this. Hang on, let me see what I can do. Shut the. So Bret has a point here, but I would say it's especially true of individuals who are trying to pick and choose. And in fact, the power of these groups, even in a Darwinian way, Alistair McGrath himself, one of my favorite books by him, is a book entitled Heresy. And Heresy makes the claim that what's actually happening within the religious tradition is that the church is selecting for those doctrines and dogmas that don't fundamentally undermine itself. And this happens over long periods of time, over a variety of different cultures. So Bret has a point here, but well, let's jump to his next point, which is out-of-date wisdom.
What I would say is there's a way in which I think this discussion could lead to a sense that there's a matter of taste, whether you want to take a admittedly very sober view of religion and the way it interfaces with science, or you want to take a bit more radical view and come at it from an evolutionary perspective. But the thing we have to look at is, let's say that this evolutionary perspective is actually right or substantially right. If it is, we have a new problem, which is that those books are full of wisdom that is not up to date. And what we know, beyond a shadow of any doubt, is that we are playing with tools that are very unlike the tools that the ancestors who refined these texts had at their disposal. And so and I've had this argument with Jordan Peterson too, the problem with recognizing that these are compendiums of some kind of wisdom, well, there are a couple problems. One, some of the wisdom is itself immoral. You know, if you look at the Old Testament and you look at Deuteronomy.
Now, Bret, you should really own your own agency in making this judgment. Now, this is immoral. Okay. Immoral according to me. Well, what, in fact, are these positions in your evolutionary theory about religion? They are themselves ideas that afforded the community an adaptive advantage over their competitors. They are part of the meme verse or the story verse that afforded those who held these ideas adaptive advantages within their environment over their competitors, whether they be human or Neanderthal or other things, I suppose.
You'll find rules for war that are absolutely abhorrent, basically advice on genocide. You'll find rules for how to properly keep slaves and things like this.
Now again, let's imagine that, say, okay, so essentially we're just doing this on a continuum for the animals. I think it's abhorrent that tigers are carnivores because, you know, the cute little goats that they're noshing down on, I think it's just wrong to kill a goat. Therefore, here's the problem, that you can't now jump in with a moral claim when you say it's amoral, and you've now included this entire process within your amoral system of selection. But, so, okay, where's the morality coming from? Upon what basis have you made this morality? If in fact these Israelite Iron Age, Bronze Age dogmas have been developed because they've afforded their communities adaptive advantages, how now can you say that that is any more or less moral than the kinds of adaptive advantages that have been developed by tigers or lions or bears?
So those are bits of wisdom from the point of view of how to advance your population's interest, but they are not ethical advice in any decent sense of.
So where is this ethical universe coming from? Well, we're going to get to that in a little while.
The term, that's one thing. But the other thing is, because these texts are products of evolution, they are only relevant to the circumstances in which they evolved.
Really? Because actually what happens over time is that even in a Darwinian, mechanistic, biological frame, adaptive advantages that have occurred over time continue to hold until they don't. Okay? So let's say it's an adaptive advantage for human beings to be omnivores. We can eat meat and we can eat vegetables. So now we might argue, well, that's been an adaptive advantage for human beings for a very long time. Another adaptive advantage that we've had is we've learned to cook our foods. So we've outsourced a lot of our digestive process to the cooking process. Okay, now, well, how has that adaptive advantage served the island of Haiti, let's say? Well, there's tremendous deforestation on Haiti. Why? They cut down trees for what? For cooking. So maybe that adaptive advantage, which was, outsourcing your digestive process via cooking on the island of Hispaniola, at least on the Haiti side, is now in fact threatening the species. Okay, that's certainly what we would expect from a Darwinian idea. Okay, so now you walk in and you say, well, this is a moral or immoral claim. Okay, well then what is morality? Well, I thought morality was itself a system that afforded adaptive advantage or disadvantage. Okay, so therefore morality is amoral because it's simply a process of adaptive advantage or disadvantage, just like all of the other processes that accumulate within us that afford us fittedness within a specific environment. In other words, the basic assumptions that you bring to this, saying this is all group A, you undercut any moral standing because you've basically turned it all into the same kind of adaptation that we see everywhere else in nature. In other words, a powerful nation subjugating a weaker nation is really no moral difference between that or a stronger animal subjugating a weaker animal. In many ways, we're knocking on Nietzsche's door here.
So the fact that the Bible provides no guidance whatsoever on the enrichment of uranium is a problem, because really we ought to know not to enrich it. What happens when you enrich it is you create a whole bunch of problems that would be paramount on any actual deity's mind. There would be wisdom about what to do about it.
Now, pause here about the enrichment of uranium. How do you know enrichment of uranium is a problem? It could be that 100 years from now, let's say all of our fossil fuels are highly problematic. What we really need as an energy source to propel us into the future is nuclear. Well, there you have it. Maybe nuclear is the salvation to our CO2 crisis. Now, often what I hear in these kinds of things is that the Bible doesn't say anything about uranium enrichment. And actually, I'm not going to play it, but Alistair McGrath jumps right in and says, well, no, wait a minute. The Bible might not speak to every different context, but what we do with the Bible is, in fact, use principles we find in it and adapt it to different contexts. And I would assert that that process is not only post-Bible, but one of the fun things I did in seminary was I read very closely the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy. It's sort of a fun exercise because what you very much learn is that there are all these subtle differences between the same tables of law in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And as you begin to read them, you can sort of begin to discern the contextual differences between the two readings. All right? And biblical scholars have known this for a very long time, that in fact, this dealing with contexts is something that is in fact built into the Bible, and what we do after the Bible is a continuation of that process. And So my point being, the Bible doesn't just work as a list of rules. Thou shalt not enrich uranium. The Bible is in fact a story, which is a far richer narrative within which we find meaning, we discern principles, and we apply those principles to new situations. And as I mentioned before, Christianity, as opposed to, say, Judaism and Islam, has been particularly adept at translating these things to different contexts. Now, there's a rich and full and vigorous conversation within the religion about the merit of many of these adaptations. Again, one key one right now in North America is the question of same-sex attraction. And the United Methodist Church just had a big fight. The United Methodist Church decided before any of this came up that they were going to be a global church, so they had a significant African population and a significant North American population, and when it came time to take votes about same-sex attraction and gay priests, well, the Africans and the conservative Americans basically teamed up and defeated the progressives. Well, what do you call that? Well, this is all part of the religious process. Now, you can look at it in Darwinian terms, and that's helpful in many ways, but if you reduce it to Darwinian terms, then you really can't talk about it's right or wrong, and you really can't take that soapbox that he initially took up and said about the Bible, there's immoral stuff in there. Immoral on what basis? Not upon the frame that you have given us, because you're the one that said that Darwinianism is amoral.
But it's not in there. And so, and maybe the last piece of that puzzle is not only will deity to create a whole bunch of problems that would be paramount on any actual deity's mind.
And also his presumption about what kinds of deities are there. You see, my argument is that, in fact, the Bible is the discussion because this kind of deityless existence that we sort of postulate for ourselves in this tiny little moment where we imagine that there is no God, something the vast majority of the world population would never have thought about. Plenty of deities would have said, hey, nuke those people. I mean, have you ever read any mythology? It's pretty bloody.
There would be wisdom about what to do about it, but it's not in there. And so, and maybe the last piece of that puzzle is not only is it not in there, but we don't have time for it to be generated through the normal evolutionary process. We don't have 1,000 years to figure out what the wisdom for our new tools is.
Now, when I heard this, I thought, this is the wimpy we, okay? Because, well, we don't have time to figure it out. Well, actually, if we consider your system, the way you talk about it, we will figure it out. Well, what might it cost us? Well, it might cost us, well, we got 8-9 billion people. It might cost us 7 or 8 billion people. And it might make the world a very different place. And a little bit later, we're going to get into the idea of, well, we want a sustainable Earth. Well, you know, humans, well, sustainable in what time frame? If you imagine the heat death of the universe, well, nothing is sustainable. There's no sustainability in the age of decay. Everything starts and stops and comes and goes. The sustainability is, in a sense, the effect of our experience of narrative idealism in our mind, which then we can get into all of the Vervaeke stuff about the axial age and, you know, why is it that my body ages but inside me and my grandma say, I just feel like I felt when I was 21. You know, what's going on here? The world is far more complex than this.
We have to figure that out in some other way. And so somehow we have to recognize there's wisdom. Some of that wisdom remains relevant and honorable. Some of it is no longer relevant. Some of it was never honorable. And we need a mechanism to add to it in a non-religious framework.
And again, what he's really got to do is own his filter. You have the wimpy we. Well, we're not going to be able to figure this out. Not we probably will, and most of us will die. We don't like that thought, but isn't that how evolution works? Isn't that what the whole story is about? And then there's the exceptional me. So you have the wimpy we and the exceptional me. I judge that, oh, okay, well, you know what? The dodo birds judge that they shouldn't go extinct either, but That's the system. Tough luck. Nobody, at least in a godless universe, nobody finally cares. Nobody finally sees. It just doesn't matter.
And I don't know how we're going to get there, but I do have the sense that that is the adult conversation.
And again, I'm no. Watch the whole thing. Watch the whole thing. I've listened to the whole thing twice now, and it's a very good conversation. But now, what was really interesting is towards the end of part one, Bret really lays out his religion. I thought this was for me a high point of this whole conversation.
What's your feeling? I to some extent, I feel like you're saying we're at a point now where we have to find a way forward in ways that the religion that maybe did bind us together and gave us a way of surviving, if you like, in the world today no longer applies. It seems that you're aware that there are ethical sort of absolutes, things that we should be aiming towards, and that if our evolutionary impulses are no longer fit for purpose in that sense, and we can recognise that we need to sort of take command of the process and come up with, I suppose that...
And again, this conversation is haunted by Nietzsche, because if in fact you buy, well, God is dead, he's not here anymore, then we are dead too, because we are the children of Group B, and God is the God of Group B. And we're making all of these moral declarations and decisions. And again, read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles and his book The Abolition of Man, which Alistair McGrath will recommend when it comes to later in this story. Read those books, and Lewis makes these points again and again and again in the 40s, because the conversation really hasn't changed that much.
The big question for me is that's hanging over all this is that ethical one that Alistair raised earlier, which is you do seem to believe, Bret, that there is an oughtness about how we should behave, this idea that there is a fundamental rightness about the way humans treat each other and the common purposes we should have. Some might say, well, there's the faith, if you like. That's the religious impulse again. There is something beyond just the material world. There is actually something that undergirds it. I mean, what would you say to that idea?
I would say that the problem is that when you study evolution, you respect the products that it produces, but you also come to understand that the universe is an immoral or an amoral place.
You respect the products, okay. Value is a term of respect. You've established a hierarchy. I just want to pop Gene Wilder back in here. Tell me more about your hierarchy. Where does this hierarchy come from? Why should life be valued above death? Death lasts longer.
And that there's no justice in nature. Humans have invented justice, and that
There's no justice in nature. Humans have invented justice. Hold on. Wait a minute. No justice in nature. Humans have invested justice. Well, in other words, justice is part of Group B. We invented justice. We also invented cat videos. Now, we might say justice offers us more than cat videos, but we're back to the fact-value distinction. Nature is immoral, but humans aren't a part of nature. Wait a minute. The whole argument has been humans, including religion, are all a part of nature. It's all part of Group A. It all goes on its own. That's the point of Darwin. You can't stop using those rules now because you're scared. You think animals, you think that goat that gets eaten by the tiger isn't scared? Well, we just have these big brains and we figure out all kinds of reasons and justifications why the tiger shouldn't eat the goat. If that's your universe, it's just the same as the fear of the goat.
It is precious and it is easily destroyed. Nature, an immoral or an aim. So you respect the products that it produces, but you also come to understand that the universe is an immoral or an amoral place. and that there's no justice in nature. Humans have invented justice, and that it is precious and it is easily destroyed.
Why is it precious?
And the problem is, to the extent that these traditions, which contain ethics within them, are products of evolution, they are potentially very valuable, but that...
Again and again and again and again. They're products of evolution, just like the goat and the tiger. Where's the progress? Where do you find this value? Your system doesn't afford it. It affords it only to the degree that it is seeking some predetermined, presuppositional value that you have declared and created your hierarchy with.
That ability to cooperate, which is really what those ethical principles are about, is for a purpose. Cooperate to compete. Now, if we keep playing that game, it will end very soon. So how do we abstract that idea that...
And this is my favorite move that I keep calling him on him because he keeps making it. We're not evolved anymore. We're not wired. We're not programmed. All of our thoughts somehow come from a free space that he has not in any way accounted for by his system, which is supposed to account for everything.
We can cooperate and come to a new agreement about how to leave essentially an equilibrium, a sustainable human population in which, and this would be my highest ethical principle, how can we give the maximum number of humans the experience of living on a beautiful planet as possible?
Bingo! We have a religion. It's born. Dum da dum da dum da dum da dum. Time to celebrate. A religion is born. But we've seen this religion before. Here it is. Let's give people a sustainable experience. But of course, as Agent Smith explained to Morpheus, we tried to give you that, and you didn't like it. So we gave you 1999 instead, because this was the peak of your civilization, right? The movie The Matrix? We're all become batteries for the grand machine that's giving us the most sustainable, the maximum number of humans, the experience of living on a beautiful planet as possible. But hence the meaning crisis. Because go back and watch John Vervaeke and Christopher Mastropietro talk about the meaning crisis and its symptoms. Read Dostoevsky. Read Tolstoy. Bret Weinstein is basically saying, we need some sustainable thing. Well, maybe we had that before we discovered things like science and antibiotics and all of these things that we've touted by Steven Pinker, we've touted as these are the glorious things that we've discovered for human happiness and flourishing. Well, maybe actually we were flourishing before because we enjoyed meaning, even though we didn't have antibiotics or anything, because the meaning we enjoyed was huddled in our little cabin with the wolf sniffing at the door. Indefinite inhabitants. The age of decay does not afford this. A bunch of traditions. Well, let me finish. Let him finish.
It is not going to involve packing the largest number of people on the planet at once. It's going to involve somehow backing away from what we call carrying capacity and leaving a population that cannot destroy as it continues to live on the Earth. And in that way, humanity could become indefinite inhabitants.
I think we have an axial age religion. We have a key number of people, and they're somehow as happy as maximally possible. And it seems awfully static up there.
So, how do we get from a bunch of traditions that were evolved in the context of competing with each other and driving out another population as your population flourished, how can we step away from that competition and replace it with something that is enlightened with respect to human well-being and the ethics that exist within each of these traditions?
I suppose the question again it raises for me.
Justin's not going to let this go. Justin has sat through thousands of hours of these talks, okay? And you know, he's not a dummy. He listens, he hears, and he comes right to the nub of it. And he brought Adam to the same nub, and now it's going to be Bret to the same nub, and it's the same point, and Alistair's going to jump in because, yeah, we all get this.
Though is you speak of a highest ethical principle. Now, did evolution give you that ethic, or is it something that you actually believe goes beyond, you know, any kind of evolutionary explanation? There is this thing that we should aim at, regardless of where.
There is this thing. This is as maximum number of people as happy as they can. There's his value. Okay, are there unicorns? Are there ponies? Are there puppies and kittens? Is there antibiotics? Because, you know, we've had a lot of humans at a pretty stable planet. So maybe, in fact, the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and understanding Darwin, maybe all that was the bad idea. At least according to the value. No, but this is a world that we will create. Oh, where have I heard that before? There's Genesis 1, there's Genesis 2, and there's Genesis 3. We're back to the story of the garden.
Evolution took us in the past.
I have a feeling the answer to that is going to sound a little bit like nonsense. But every creature that has ever existed on this planet has had the identical purpose, right?
It's a revelation. Every creature that has ever been on this planet has had an identical purpose. Wow. We have arrived at Aristotle's final cause for every creature. In other words, the purpose of the goat is to be happy. And in the goat's, you know, Hard Rock Candy Mountain, there are no tigers, right? Maybe I should make that a theme song. Maybe I should put that little video right in this video. He's discerned the final cause for everything.
Right, and that purpose has to do with propagating its particular genetic spellings into the future.
But it's down to the tiny little programs within us, not the purpose of Genghis Khan to make as many copies of himself as possible.
That purpose is served by creating larger numbers of offspring, but that's not the only way it's served. The idea is getting genes into the future, right? Living to compete in future.
So all of these spellings, now we're into panpsychism. Watch the video I just posted with my conversation. All of these spellings, in fact, they're not even particles, because spellings is just information. All of the information has desires. Well, suddenly, in a world that we imagine that desire is a product of material evolution, spellings have desire.
Rounds of the game. It's a very stupid game. It is the cosmic spelling bee that ends in genocide. And so
Age of Empires ends in genocide every game. Monopoly ends in genocide every game. But you think our little material beings, and at least human little beings, it's speciesism. Peter Singer, again, watch Adam and Justin have their conversation. We're going back over the same thing again and again.
What I believe is that we humans are among the most amazing creations of that process that have ever been. We have an absolutely stunning capacity for compassion and decency and empathy, and that our ability to comprehend allows us to take those capacities and to recognize that what we are actually designed to do and what our traditions are designed
Wait. What did you say?
to comprehend allows us to take those capacities and to recognize that what we are actually designed to do
What we are actually designed to do.
and what our traditions are designed to facilitate is not defensible.
We're made by the evil demiurge.
And we must take evolution out of the driver's seat, and we must put ourselves, our best ethic.
What is this self, and where does it come from, and how does it live? I thought the meme verse was like the Darwin verse, and I thought it's all running by the same rules. Well, actually, what you're saying in this thing is that we're essentially like the goat, just a whole lot more sophisticated, and we're trying to figure out how to rid the world of tigers.
Selves in the driver's seat if we're to survive. And the bitter pill for me is I don't.
If we're to survive, because that's our goal. But pause, if we're to survive, Finchness is a variable. We are variable. So, what does it mean for us to survive? What does it mean? What did it mean for Hector or Achilles to survive? Well, what it meant for them was that their story would live on. And just me now mentioning the name of Hector and mentioning the name of Achilles, well, mission accomplished. They've survived all the way up into my video. What did it mean for the ancient Hebrews to survive? Well, the worst thing was to be cut off, to have their children no longer reproduce. That's what it meant for them to survive, that their DNA, well, that sounds just like Darwin. Well, watch Black Mirror, and I forget the name of it, where they all kind of go off into a computer, and they all survive in a computer. Is that what we're doing? Are we going to reach Kurzweil singularity and survive in that way? Because Finchness is the variable here. It's there's no progress, and in a sense, well, let's imagine that our hominid ancestors on the plains of Africa said, we have to figure out what we need to do to survive. Let's lose a lot of hair and walk a little bit more upright and really eat some of that brain food. So is we them? Have the Neanderthals survived by putting their genetics into us? This makes no sense in a Darwinian perspective, because what are we? And you're going to use this to say what? We should or shouldn't do eugenics? We should or shouldn't merge with our machines? We should or shouldn't. This is going to be your guide to any of this? I'm dubious.
I don't know whether that's even possible, but I do think there's nothing else worth pursuing. Either.
Where is he? Where is he? There he is. You've established a value without simultaneously creating a hierarchy? Please tell me more.
We do that, or it's just a question of watching how it comes apart.
Now, maybe I'm being too snarky, so if I am, forgive me. But I'm trying to emphasize the point, a point that C.S. Lewis made 70 years ago. Others have made it too. There's an incoherence to this story that you just have to sit down and think about. And Alistair McGrath is about to nail him.
What do you think about the way Bret has arrived at this
And Justin's just smiling because he knows what's coming.
ethical principle to which any evolutionary processes ultimately
Well,
have
clearly,
to be?
I'm going to take what he says with great seriousness and indeed his view with the greatest respect. But I am going to just make 2 points, which I think just to show that there's a great discussion to be had here. Okay, Number one, this does sound just like utilitarianism. The language you used very much along those lines. I don't object to that in many ways, but why that theory choice? There is that issue. And also, I admire this noble aspiration to find the highest possible ideal, and I like that. But evolution doesn't really allow you to talk about the highest possible.
That's your game. Evolution, right? There's no progress in it. It just is. It's just fittedness. There's the goat is of no more value than the tiger, unless you're a goat or a tiger. And this is again where consciousness and identity and the knower and the observer and the subject are critically missing from this entire system.
But evolution doesn't really allow you to talk about the highest possible. I'm just worried about that. And also, I think, David Hume's coming back to haunt us a bit. You cannot move from the empirical to the normative. And so, how on earth do we get this? And actually, if I may say it, and this is simply me responding to what I think is a very interesting proposal from you. It's almost as if you're proposing a new religion to meet this new challenge.
Let's hear that again.
And if you're proposing a new religion to meet this new challenge. And I think that's very interesting. But I think you may find some people who would disagree with that.
Religion? Disagreement? I thought, this was the point that he made. The point that he made was, we're going to give the maximum number of humans the experience of living on as beautiful a planet as possible for an indefinite period of time. And the bunch of traditions have to yield to one enlightened tradition of human well-being. That's a religion. That's what all the religions have been doing the whole time. That's the whole game. And the point that they made about the celebrity atheists and the new atheist was exactly right. The unintended consequence was, I'm against religion. Now let's play some more. That's what we're doing. Evolution doesn't allow you to talk about the highest ideal possible. There's no value there. You're bringing the value into the game. There's no progress, just fittedness and change. You're proposing a new religion. And he says, well, what are we wired for? Well, he continues.
People hate it. But I would be careful. It's not a new religion.
Yes.
What it is something that sits in the same place. It addresses some of the same needs, but it...
But we're not going to call it a religion, because that would get us in trouble with some other people that we don't want to get in trouble with. But we're not going to call it a religion, but it sits in the same place and meets the same needs.
It is not founded on the same principle.
It's the whole supernatural thing again. But you still haven't answered where you're getting the stuff that everyone got from the supernatural, which was their hierarchy of values.
It's founded on an understanding that what we are wired for is not a good match for what we are capable of.
What we are wired for is not a good match for what we are capable of. Now, I would usually use my cell phone stand, but let's employ the clock today. What my clock is wired for is not what it's capable of. I would assert that my clock is exactly wired for what it is capable of, and probably not a lot more. You can't, on one hand, say, we are what we have been wired for, but there's no intention in this. Now let's do something that we're capable of. Well, I'd think that what we're capable of is what we're wired for without intention.
So I do think, and I know I have to say it gently because of the sacred, because of...
Please don't think you're going to hurt my feelings, okay? I'm not that wimpy. I've got pretty tough skin. You can tell me. Just be on the internet and watch what has been said. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'd just like you to own what you're doing.
People's, what would up until very recently have been a necessary resistance to new ideas corrupting the compendiums of wisdom that they've been handed. But we can all see that we live in circumstances that we have no wisdom for. I mean, in fact, even...
I thought you were giving us the wisdom that we need for now. Isn't this exactly what you're doing on this stage? Is you are giving us the wisdom that we need for now, in your opinion? That's what we're doing here.
The world that we were each born into is now gone. Things are changing so rapidly that we couldn't possibly have wisdom that would keep up. So, what are we going to do about that question?
But even... Gosh, I wish I could make the screen bigger, like with my old software. Even... Who's we? Has, Bret, your world changed so quickly? Yeah, yours has, because of the whole evergreen thing. And again, watch Benjamin Boyce on that. Yours has changed really fast. How about maybe someone living in Northern Europe during the Viking period? Their world changed fast. Well, we said, well, their world didn't change so fast. Well, it depends on the subject in many ways, doesn't it? Now, lots is changing for lots of people. I'm not making an argument that change isn't happening rapidly, or even challenging the fact that we have so much firepower now that... But this gets back to other arguments that plenty of non-Christians have made that, well, maybe we're just, maybe the reason that the universe is so quiet is because when we get smart enough, we don't go on very much longer because we kill ourselves. Well, that's not a very happy thought. So, well, let's just think happy thoughts, shall we?
Can we do something about it while we are fighting each other? I don't think so. So in some sense,
So you're a pacifist.
There's a kind of utilitarianism here. I'm not a narrow utilitarian. It would have to be a sort of enlightened utilitarian.
He's being so nice, isn't he, Alistair? He's been absolutely lovely. And Bret has too. Again, I've gotten snarky in this video, and maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should be the nice pastor who doesn't get snarky, but I think Bret can do better than this.
Utilitarian for me to sign up for it. Otherwise, you can justify things like slavery and the like. But
the problem I have is that this actually leads to totalitarianism. Because, again, well, you are postulating a new religion. And you want your religion to succeed over the other religions. And I'm terribly gratified that you live in a time and place when, thanks in many ways to what we learned after the bloody aftermath of the Protestant Revolution, all the way over into North Ireland in the very recent future, we're having conversations where our little imaginative words can die instead of killing each other. And I am completely down for that project. And in fact, but what kind of people do we need to be formed by? Because the difficulty that we have here is, in a sense, Bret is making a totalitarian argument that this is what we must do to survive. Well, you know what? When all of those things were written into the Old Testament, killing the Amorites was what you needed to do to survive. And God wiping out Sodom and Gomorrah was what was needed to survive. And, margins were thin. So I'm sorry, there's no room for being gay in our community. Everybody needs to get busy, and we're going to have polygamy because we're going to put out as many babies as possible, because otherwise the Midianites are going to overcome us. And so that's the game, right? That's Darwin's game. So is this. This isn't a break from that. Now, Bret is a super nice guy, and if Bret and I ever meet in person, I will feel no danger from him, because we have huge commonalities in terms of culture and tradition and all of this, and we could have a heated argument. I can make this video and could have all of this go on, and I fear no evil from Bret, okay? That's just true. But You can't say this and not recognize it's the same game. This itself is the religious competition. And I know because I am a religious competitor, because I am a Christian minister who's trying to gain more people for Team Christian. In fact, it even goes down. Not only Team Christian, okay, you go to the Orthodox Church, that's cool. If you go to the Christian Reformed Church, well, then I'll especially feel gratified. This is not a break from the game. It is a new religion. And it can be totalitarian, and I don't think it offers the same kind of hope.
Do you think, whether it is unseemly or not, we actually have to contemplate coming up with something novel enough to have a prayer of being up to the challenge of dealing with our problems?
I would say that every time we say the word have to, you've obviously already brought in your values. There's a little totalitarian risk involved because you say it's do this or die. And then you come to the point of, well, who's going to be doing the dying? Well, it's the people with the wrong ideas that are going to be doing the dying, so that the people with the right ideas can be at the top of the hierarchy, and they can be the ones in control. And what I would offer is that there's a religion that actually has someone at the top of its hierarchy that walks into a situation where everybody's playing the same old game with swords, and he says, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And in the moment in that garden, he says, if anybody's blood is going to be shed, it's going to be mine. And I will win the game. It doesn't make any sense in Darwin land. But that's what Christianity says.